Welcome to the public webinar for the consideration of the emergency regulation in response to the governor's executive order N-7-22. Please do stay in mute. If you want to request to unmute, please do use the raise hand function. And please do rename yourself in Zoom. When there is the Q&A, I will call on you to unmute, and it would be great to have your name. If you need any technical assistance, unfortunately, the Zoom does not have a chat function, so please do use the raise hand function and we will assist you in unmuting. And again, the webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our webpage. You can see for more information, you can go to bit.ly/conservationreg for more information about the emergency regulation. So the purpose of this webinar is to give stakeholders an opportunity for questions and feedback in advance of the formal rulemaking for the emergency regulation. There'll be various opportunities to participate. If during the presentation you have any clarifying questions, please do raise your hand. Again, this Zoom does not include a chat function. So let's see. Oh. And after the presentation, we'll have a live Q&A. That's when you use the raise hand feature. Again, if you're on the telephone, you can press *9 to raise your hand and we'll call on you. And then you'll be asked to unmute. You can press *6 if you're on the phone. And after the webinar, there's an opportunity for a public comment. A notice will be sent out mid-May. So please be on the LIRIS. Again, you can get on the LIRIS or email list by going to bit.ly/conservationreg and sign up for the email list so that you get the announcements. And again, the webinar is being recorded and will be posted on that website. So for today, we will introduce some State Water Board staff. And we will let you know, item 2 is the timeline of the rulemaking. 3, an overview of the staff working draft of the emergency regulation. And 4, then we'll have the live Q&A, and that's when you can raise your hand and we will call on you to provide questions or feedback. So I'll just quickly introduce the State Water Board staff who are working on this regulation. I am Chris Hyun. I'm climate lead at the State Water Board. I also work on water conservation, and I am the staff contact for this emergency regulation. We're calling the May 2022 regulation. I was also staff contact for the January 2022 regulation. Also, another staff contact is Paula Gonzalez. She will be joining us shortly. Also on the call is manager Max Gomberg and Director of Office of Research Planning and Performance, James Nachbauer, and our counsel, David Rose and Garrett Lanahan. On the call may also be State Water Board members, Diadamo and McGuire. I'm unsure if they are on the call. Looks like their board member McGuire is on the call. If you would like to make any comments at the beginning of this webinar, feel free to do so. All right, let's see. It looks like possibly no comments at this time. If possibly later, feel free to raise your hand. I cannot see if a board member Diadamo is also on the call. If either of you on the call and would like to make a comment, please do raise your hand.
Thank you, Chris. This is Sean McGuire. I just appreciate everyone getting together on such short notice today. I know there's not a lot of time here to consider acting on the governor's executive order and these rules. So just really encouraged to see this level of participation and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So it seems like board member Diadamo is on the call. So we'll move on. If board member Diadamo is on the call, she could raise her hand and we'll give her an opportunity to provide comment. So the first thing then we'll talk about, item 2 on our list, is the timeline of the rulemaking. The emergency regulation may be in effect by June 10th of this year, depending on board action and OAL process. By mid-May 2022, as I mentioned before, the notice will be posted and public comment will begin. So again, look out for that through the email list. By May 24th, the board will consider the adoption of the emergency regulation. And by June 10th, the emergency regulation may be in effect depending on the Office of Administrative Law process and board action. Again, you can find more information and updates on the bit.ly/conservation-reg website, and also you can sign up for email updates. So just to give an overview of the draft of the regulation. So first of all, the governor ordered that the State Water Board consider regulation on level 2 actions and non-functional turf. So in the executive order, it was stated that by June 1st, that water suppliers submit to the Department of Water Resources supply and demand assessments. 2, the water suppliers implement level 2 actions by a deadline defined by the State Water Board. And 3, that there will be a ban on the irrigation of non-functional turf in commercial, industrial, and institutional sectors, or CI&I. So breaking that down, so first, to submit preliminary annual water supply and demand assessments by June 1st, 2022. So again, we're talking about a working staff draft of the emergency regulation text that was circulated to inform input for today's webinar. So for this first item, applies to urban water suppliers. They are to submit these preliminary assessments to the Department of Water Resources in compliance with Water Code Section 10632.1. And the Department of Water Resources have a variety of resources to guide water suppliers. So that includes the annual assessment draft guidance from February 2022, and the link is in the slide, as well as Urban Water Management Plan's web page has a number of resources, and the link is there. Again, resources will be sent out after this webinar. The Department of Water Resources will also be hosting a webinar on the preliminary supply and demand assessments that will be hosted on April 28th at 1 to 3 p.m. Pacific time. They will go over preliminary annual water shortage assessment report requirements, as well as the submittal process for the assessments due on June 1st, 2022. It'll also be hosted by the Association of California Water Agencies. Zoom registration is required. So take note of the Zoom registration link in the slide. The second item in the draft regulation is that requires urban water suppliers to implement level 2 actions by June 10th, 2022. So urban water suppliers should have drafted and submitted water shortage contingency plans, or WSCPs, which should include level 2 water shortage response actions. If a WSCP has not yet been submitted, then level 2 actions will be in the draft staff regulation text. Department of Water Resources has provided information for consideration, and it's on our website. And the State Water Board will finalize minimum required actions for level 2 for those water suppliers that have not submitted a WSCP. And currently in the draft, the deadline is June 10th, 2022, but this deadline will be finalized by the State Water Board. The third item is a ban of irrigation of non-functional turf in commercial, industrial, and institutional sectors, or CI&I. So non-functional turf is solely ornamental and not regularly used for human recreational purpose purposes or for civic or community events. This is what is stated in the current staff working draft of the regulation text. Currently, the staff working draft applies only to potable water, but the final definition will be informed by public comment before the regulation is put in effect. So again, look out for that notice, which will come out in mid-May for public comment, which will be integrated into the final, which will inform the final regulation text. Furthermore, in the current working draft of the regulation text, non-functional turf does not include sports fields and does not include human recreational purposes or for civic or community events. Also, the ban on irrigation of non-functional turf does not apply to the residential sector. Also does not apply when required for health of trees and other perennial plantings in CI&I sectors, and does not apply when addressing immediate health and safety needs. Water suppliers are expected to communicate to CI&I customers about the ban. Just as a reminder, any Californian may report water waste at savewater.ca.gov. So this can be reached through your cell phone web browser or computer web browser. Anyone can file a complaint, upload photos, and these reports are sent to local water suppliers. Just a note to water suppliers, please ensure your agency has updated staff contact information on this site. All right, and this is the last slide before we get to Q&A. So again, for more info, you can go to the emergency regulations website. Go to bit.ly/conservationreg. There you can subscribe to stay informed, for email, to be on the email list for the rulemaking and public comment announcements. Again, the main state water board context for this emergency regulation is myself, Christopher Hyun, and as well as Paula Gonzalez. And now we'll get into the live Q&A. So please use the raised hand feature and we'll go in order. If you are on the telephone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. Again, please rename your name in Zoom if you're able to your name and affiliation. And I will ask you to unmute. If you're on the phone, unmuting and muting is *6. All right, so I will go in order. Please state your name and affiliation when you are unmuted. So I will start with Greg B, and then after Greg B will be Staci T. So Greg B, I'm asking you to unmute, and please start with your name, affiliation, and your question or comment.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank the State Water Board thank staff for putting this meeting on and for and allowing us to make comments. I think my question is going to resonate with several who had posted in the comments in the previous Zoom meeting. My question is, Sacramento Suburban Water District has a rich history of conjunctive use, and we have a very vast aquifer that we draw our primary water supply of groundwater off of. And through efforts with the Sacramento Groundwater Authority, we have determined what our sustainable yield is from our basin to maintain basin health. So over the years, when we've been taking surface water, we've banked groundwater for years, such as this, when it is relatively dry. And currently, our projected demand is well below what our projected sustainable supplies are. And I was wondering if the state board, as with the previous drought, I believe in 2016-17, allowed an opt-out version if we can show that we have more supplies, or if we have supplies that are more than our demands are projected to be. Is that a consideration from the State Water Board? If not, I would highly recommend that option be included, particularly that with the fact that we're going to be doing a annual supply and demand assessment. If we can show 100% of our customer demands can be met with our current supplies, I believe that should be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Dave Rose, our counsel, will be taking that question.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me, Chris, and everybody else?
Yes, we can.
Awesome,
Thank you.
thanks. So first of all, I appreciate the position that you're in. It's great that for all the suppliers that have taken actions previously to be prepared for these types of conditions. Where we are right now is, as Chris noted, we have a staff proposal that you all have access to, and the staff proposal currently does not include an opt-out or a supply demand assessment like we had through some of the later iterations in the last drought regulations, simply because the governor's executive order doesn't specify a limited category of whom this should be directed to. Now, that doesn't mean that the board won't consider that when they consider the proposed regulation, but the current staff proposal does not include a carve out like that for those specific circumstances, which again, I appreciate that you've prepared for, and can certainly tell your customers, if the board does adopt this regulation as is, that it's not that you don't have that supply, but that the board is telling you that that's what you need to be doing right here to really just to participate in the conservation program that the rest of the state is doing. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. We will move on to Shelley T, and then after that, Michael D. So Shelley, I will ask you to unmute and go ahead with your name and affiliation. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Shelley Thompson from South Tahoe Public Utility District. Thanks for your question, Greg. South Tahoe is in the same situation as you guys are. My question is regarding the ban of CII non-functional turf and just what the expectations are for how to enforce that ban.
All right. Thank you for the question. Is it okay if I hand it over to, again, our counsel, Dave Rose?
Certainly fine with me. Thanks.
Great.
So at this point, again, we're at the staff draft proposal. So the expectation is not a requirement. There's not a requirement in the draft reg text that you do anything in particular, but the expectation, I think, would be that you at least communicate that. So if there's going to be something added to the regulation by the board as part of consideration, giving suppliers or municipalities the authority to enforce it, like some of the other prohibitions the board has adopted, we'd love to hear if you want that. But at this time, there isn't a direct enforcement authority for the CII landscape prohibition that's included in the draft reg text. And I hope I answered all the components of the question.
All right. I believe we can move on. So again, if you want to ask a question or share a comment, please use the raise hand feature. If you're on the telephone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. So we'll move on to Michael D, and after that, Elizabeth L. So I'm unmuting Michael, and please state your name and your affiliation.
Hi, this is Michael DeGhetto from the city of Glendale. And my question again is also about the CII. The last time we went through this with the governor's emergency order, he indicated it was medians, street medians. And so when the legislation was adopted, it was very specific about that. And it just seems like now the governor again is legislating, I guess, what he feels is non-functional turf, and then that applies to now industrial and commercial customers, and that isn't what's in our water shortage contingency plan stages. It's not what's in our municipal code. It's not what's in our rates. And the way that the legislation reads and the way that we prepared our water shortage contingency plans is based on what's in the legislation, not again another kind of emergency order legislation by pen by the governor. And I would just like to say that as a comment related to this proposed regs. And then my second comment would be, I noticed that you mentioned, Chris, that right now it's potable. I would really urge the board to keep it only for potable, because so many of us have invested in recycled water projects to have a drought-proof supply. I would just ask the board to resist any calls to also add recycled to those prohibitions related to irrigation. Thanks.
Hey, Chris,
Yes.
this is Eric Oppenheimer. If I could just jump in here for a
Yes,
moment.
please do.
Eric with the Water Board. First, thank you for that last comment on the CII and the non-functional turf. And as you know, our job is to implement the executive order. We do think that the ban on non-functional turf will help achieve the statewide conservation goal of 15%. And so, we are, as directed by the executive order, trying to implement it as it was proposed in that order. So I don't really want to comment on like the executive direction here, and just say, our job is to implement it. I did want to go back to the last question and just get some clarification from our council on the enforcement. And I wanted to ask why, while there's no specific enforcement provision for others to enforce against the non-functional turf ban, the Water Board has the authority to enforce against it. Is that correct, David Rose?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The board has authority to enforce its own regulations.
So I just wanted to clarify that point. And then back to the last commenter just on why non-functional turf and medians. The thing I want to say there is I hope you see in the draft reg text that we put out that we're really trying to maintain flexibility and discretion to the people implementing that. We could have, tried to craft something that was a lot more prescriptive, and instead we tried to keep it simple with flexibility by saying, irrigating non-functional turf is banned, except, and I'm paraphrasing here, but except when needed to keep, trees in good health and perennial non-turf plantings in good health. And the way that's worded now, there is discretion, I would say. And, we're looking for people to be responsible. Like if you've got like a parkway strip between a sidewalk and a street and it is all turf and there is not a single tree, we expect that system would be turned off or capped and not irrigated. That's pretty clear. But there are going to be instances where you have, a lot of trees interspersed with turf, and we're leaving some discretion there, at least in the current staff draft, for the person running the irrigation system to figure out what makes sense. You might have a situation where it's mostly turf with some trees, and you want to just turn off certain nozzles and leave other nozzles on so the trees are getting irrigated. But we're not trying to be very prescriptive there, and we're trying to provide flexibility, as I said before. And also, yes, the staff proposal at this point is for that prohibition to apply to potable water. So just wanted to just make a few points there, because we recognize this banning non-functional turf is new. It's it affects a lot of people in a lot of places, but given that it is an emergency regulation that presumably is only in effect for a year, we're trying to maintain some flexibility, not get overly prescriptive. And I hope that helps.
Thank you, Eric. I believe I said Elizabeth L. be next, and then Fiona Wilson after that. So I will unmute Elizabeth. And then I know Fiona had put, I'm just going to say Fiona had put something in the chat in the Zoom. I will read that in the chat before Fiona begins her comment. But here is Elizabeth, and please state your affiliation as well.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Lovestad with the San Diego County Water Authority. I just wanted to start by thanking staff for the flexibility that they put in the proposed regulations. We appreciate that you're looking at the locally developed water shortage contingency plans and the actions that are in there. One of the comments that I wanted to make is that, like some of the others, there've been a lot of investments made in drought resilient supplies. And part of the water shortage contingency plan is includes both demand reduction and supply augmentation. And that is actually included in the legislation in 2018. And I think in the governor's actually executive order, it says water shortage actions, which could be supply augmentation and demand reduction. Is there any plan to perhaps change the reporting to allow suppliers to not only list what they're doing to reduce demand, but list the drought resilient supplies that they have, and perhaps, water that's available in storage, things that are there to kind of respond during a drought?
This is Christian here again. As far as the executive order, our understanding is that this provision was not in the executive order, but other staff counsel, if you want to comment and respond to this question.
Sure, I won't speak to the reporting component just because others could probably do that better than I can. But as noted, the staff proposal is slightly different from the executive order in that it is calling on suppliers to implement the demand reduction actions as opposed to all of the actions under their level 2 of their water shortage contingency plan. And at least the thinking on the staff level behind that is that this is a governor's call for everybody to implement the same level of their water shortage contingency plans, but not everybody is, and I think we've gotten comments about this already, is necessarily under a local water supply condition where you need to reduce by, or need to address a 10 to 20% shortage. And so it didn't make sense from the staff perspective to have you implement supply augmentation actions that might take water out of storage before you needed it. So, we weren't asking for you to trigger those things, but just to trigger the demand reduction actions, which is most consistent with the statewide conservation message that is part of the governor's executive order and the board's regulations. Hope that helps. And I don't know if someone else wants to speak about potential updates to the reporting. But right now, under the Water Board's conservation reporting regulation, everybody is already doing the enhanced reporting. And this is probably part of your question. Everybody's already doing the enhanced reporting that has some additional fields to it.
Is there a plan? How do you guys intend to, when you guys do your monthly report out, how are you going to report on progress in this, if it's action based?
I'll just say at the highest level, I think what we would, certainly want to report out is what suppliers, what number of suppliers out of the total have indicated that they are now at stage 2 or higher. I mean, that would be the sort of the first threshold question. And then in terms of actions being taken, What we've done in the past, and I assume we do something similar, is just sort of provide some like aggregated method to show these are the types of actions being taken by this many suppliers, whether it's education and outreach or additional, and I'm just shooting from the hip here, but like additional patrolling or something like that. We would try to provide just some sort of, again, high level description of what you all are doing. But I think the most critical one is everybody moved to stage 2 by the time that they're supposed to?
Okay.
And Elizabeth, your point, I think really what you're asking for is a way to capture other things you're doing besides demand management, specifically supply augmentation. And I'm not sure that we want to put an additional reporting requirement in, because that was what we currently collect data for was subject to a previous regulation. And I don't think we can just add to it, but there may be a potential, and we'll think about this, to add like a voluntary field. I don't want to commit to it because I don't know how difficult it is to update the reporting system. But if it's feasible, we'll definitely consider adding a field where suppliers can provide information on a voluntary basis, what they're doing other than demand management to address the drought.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So next up is Fiona Wilson, and then next up after that will be Staci Taylor. I'll unmute Fiona, but before you start, I wanted to read the text that you put in the last Zoom where we were all shut out of, because there were just so many people in that Zoom that kind of agreed with your text, had shared feelings about your text. So you wrote, "I'm from the Humboldt Bay Municipal Water District located in Humboldt County. We are a water supplier to 7 local municipalities. We are not connected to the state or federal water projects. We are in the unique situation where our reservoir is at 100% capacity, completely full and spilling over our spillway. According to our urban water management plan's drought contingency section, we are at stage 1 with our water supply. My question is, since our water supply is at 100% and conserving water does nothing to support the state water supply system, is there a provision in the proposed regulations to address this situation? If there is not, we suggest that there should be. Is anyone else in this position?" And there seemed to be a lot of agreement in the chat. Fiona, maybe you'd like to expand on this and then we can respond. Sorry, let's see if I can, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Fiona, are you there? Let's see if I can. Oh, there. Just ask to unmute again to see if they're here. Fiona, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Okay, great. Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, thank you so much for reading that for me. Chris, that's our position. And I know that we're in a unique position, and I was actually really excited when I plugged that into the chat in that earlier Zoom meeting to see that other agencies are in the same position. So yes.
Thank you. I think we'll have our counsel, Dave Rose, respond.
Sure. No, I think because you had posted that in the chat in the last Zoom meeting, and then we already had a question asked on essentially the same thing. So I'm not going to repeat it verbatim, but in essence, the staff proposal doesn't have a carve out for the unique situations, because the executive order doesn't specifically call for one. The board will certainly consider that. And, I will repeat the part I think is most important, which is that we appreciate, all the work that all the suppliers have done to be in a position where, even though there is a, statewide drought conditions, that some suppliers may not be in those conditions locally. So just kudos to everybody for all the great work so far. But your comment has been received and will be and will be considered by the board, no doubt, when they get to considering the regulation.
Thank you, David. So there is room for us to have some latitude as far as our operations are concerned, potentially.
So I can't promise latitude. What I can promise is process, which is that the proposal that has hit the streets that you've seen is a staff proposal. And when the board considers it, they certainly will consider your feedback and may build that in. But whatever the regulation is that the board adopts will be the regulation, assuming it's approved by the Office of Administrative Law. So I don't want to say latitude per se, because I don't know how the board will choose to act on that, but we'll consider the executive order and all the feedback that you have before this comes to the board. Hopefully that helps. And sorry if I wasn't being too cagey on that one.
No, well, that's helpful. And just what I hear you saying is that the feedback that you have received from HBMWD, from our district, from Santa Cruz, from Santa Barbara, from San Luis Obispo, knowing, oh, there are other agencies who are not needing, who have prepared for this, we're not in that same boat, that will be taken into account. And that there will be this acknowledgement that there's not this one size fits all outfit that fits everyone.
No, absolutely. I think there's a couple things going on here. First and foremost, the recognition that the suppliers have come up with these water shortage contingency plans, and therefore everybody's potential actions are going to be different and locally constructed. The board will have to decide to what extent they're asking for a consistent message of every supplier to implement the demand reduction actions in those water shortage contingency plans. But yes, certainly a lot of suppliers have done a wonderful job, and that's not to knock the suppliers who are in dire straits, like some of the suppliers under some of the water rights curtailment situations, but really this is the staff's first cut at implementing the executive order as we read it. And your feedback is absolutely appreciated and will be taken into account.
Thank you, David. And that's not to say that, the residents of our community are not interested in conservation. I mean, we're in Northern California, of course, we are notorious for being environmentally conscious. And so yeah, that is a priority for us. It's just, we're in a different position being up here further north on the Pacific Northwest. Thank you.
This is Eric again. I would just say on this issue, it would also be helpful to know, are there provisions of your stage 2 that therefore, or in other words, are there actions that you're required to take under stage 2 that you find that would be particularly challenging in addition to the need to do them? You're saying we really don't need to go there because our supply is okay. I think it would be helpful for us also to know, like, what does it mean and what kind of hardship would it create or burden to go to stage 2? What are the actions that are giving you concern of having to do?
Thank you, Eric. I'm taking note of that, and I will get back to you on that.
Great, thank you, everyone. Again, for anyone who's just joined us, we're during a live Q&A. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the raised hand feature in Zoom. If you're on the phone, you can press *9 to raise or lower your hand. So next up will be Staci T, and I'll ask you to unmute, and after that will be Ashley M. Please state your name and your affiliation.
Thank you so much, Chris. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Great. Staci Taylor here, Water Policy Manager with Mesa Water District. We are located in north part of Orange County, Southern California. And my first comment, I have two comments today, and the first is going to sound repetitive. Like our friends at Humboldt and San Diego County Water Authority and Sac Suburban and other areas statewide, Mesa Water too has invested in both water use efficiency and developing local water supplies. In fact, we have been for the past 10 years fully independent of imported water. So we are 100% reliant on local groundwater, and that groundwater is from a well-managed Orange County groundwater basin, which is replenished with recycled wastewater. So almost 100% of the water that feeds through the sewer is highly treated and purified in North and Central Orange County by the world-renowned and award-winning groundwater replenishment system, which Mesa Water and 18 other urban retail water suppliers participate in. So we appreciate the staff's flexibility and the simplicity. We highly appreciate and we understand the position you're in with the governor's executive order. That being said, let's be very clear that requiring all urban retailers to go to level 2 of the water shortage contingency plan, the way those are built is to enable a 20% reduction throughout our service area of water use. Our customers are very wise. They have invested through their rates, through their water bills, $40 million now to become 100% reliant on local groundwater. And so I think to Eric's point, talking about the challenges, from a PR standpoint, we've already raised our rates over the past 10 years. This has been reflected to customers as becoming drought resilient. And so customers, they're smart and they're going to ask us questions. Wait a minute, we spent a lot of money to become drought resilient, and now we still have to cut back and do these actions, even though we have the ability to meet 100% of our demand with local supplies. So I think it's kind of a credibility and PR issue for us. But I don't want to belabor that point because you've heard a lot of that today. My unique comment, my second comment, has to do with the term non-functional turf. Our leadership, our board here, has a philosophy that all turf, except for perhaps AstroTurf, the plastic turf, all turf is functional. Even ornamental turf, it serves a function, property value, heat island mitigation, carbon sequestration. There are critters that live in ornamental turf. And I don't know if the State Water Board is tied to non-functional turf and defining that. We would like to suggest perhaps just using ornamental turf as the term for the prohibition on using potable water for irrigation for C2 sites of ornamental only turf. So we just throw that out there for consideration. And again, thank you so much for this opportunity, and we really appreciate it. Thanks again.
Thank you, Staci. It looks like we have a number of folks in the queue. There are about 15 people waiting. So we just want to make sure that everyone is as brief as they can be in consideration of others. That could be about under 2 minutes and giving us a little bit of time to respond. But we do want to hear everyone out during this time. So we'll go to Ashley M. And then after that, Jeff S.
Thank you for the opportunity. Echo Staci and others, but our unique comment, if you will, is regarding the inclusion of HOAs in the staff's draft proposal for non-functional turf. We are in Palm Springs, a lot of retirees on a fixed income living here in condos, and we feel that treating them differently than single family homes is inappropriate and also does not reflect how we classify them or how the state classification suggestions have been put out in the past. Many times they use less grass per person than single family homes. So we would request that you consider removing HOAs from that definition.
Great, thank you, Ashley, for the comment. And we'll move on to Jeff S. and then Stephanie H. So Jeff, I'm unmuting you. There you go, and you can state your affiliation as well.
Thank you. Jeff Stevenson with the San Diego County Water Authority. I'm the Water Resources Manager and Policy Manager. And just a couple of quick comments. Back in March of 2021, about a year ago, the Natural Resources Agency released a report from the last drought, kind of a look back on lessons learned. And that may be helpful. I noticed some of the language in the draft reg text is a little different than what came out of that report as far as recommendations for the future. And then the other thing I want to mention is that we, like other agencies, have developed sufficient supplies and a 3-year carryover storage program. And one of the kind of unanticipated consequences, unintended consequences of having a one-size-fits-all reduction is that we have fixed cost that it took to build and that we pay on to build the infrastructure and the supplies we developed. And kind of artificially reducing demands will result in increased water rates across our service area because we're selling less water and we still have fixed costs that we have to cover. So I know we're working with the state board on affordability issues, and this will run counter to affordability for our customers. And then finally, the last thing I have is a question instead of a comment. And there's the water supply and demand assessment, the one that's due June 1st, and then one on July 1st. I just want to understand a little bit about the differences between the two. I know one is preliminary, but they're only a month apart. So kind of what's the purpose for the June 1st? Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Would any staff want to respond to that last question in terms of the June 1st versus July 1st? And do we have a response to that?
Yeah, this is James Knockbauer with the State Water Board. Yeah, the goal is just to get more information sooner for drought-related decision making. And we're trying to make, the staff is trying to make a compromise here between getting data faster and getting only preliminary information.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Up next will be Stephanie H. and then Brian D. Thank you everyone for keeping your comments brief to help get through this queue.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Heistand. I'm with the City of Tracy and the Water Resources and Compliance Manager. And I have a couple of questions, actually. I am wondering, as a municipality and as our retail water supplier, what mechanism, I understand that you say that the State Water Board has the enforcement authority, but for a municipality to enforce the restrictions that you are placing or through this order, how is it that we are expected to go out and enforce that with no mechanism in place to do so? That's kind of the first question. Is it that we're going to report to you? What is that mechanism? And then secondly, I have a question regarding, again, the non-functional turf, because there's a lot of schools in every one of our jurisdictions, and not all schools, the entire school area is not considered sports play fields, and it is, if they are all on the same water system, and they don't have the ability to turn off certain sections. It might, you may have a grass strip that's connected to a larger play area, recess area, and how would you then enforce something where they're all on the same controller or the same hydrozone, or so I think there's some considerations here that you guys have to look at, because I don't think it's going to be as easy as it's being written to be for a municipality to go through and try to make this happen, especially since it's not in our water shortage contingency plans. It is not in our ordinances. And the majority of them are already under WELO. So I guess those are some of my questions.
So I guess this is James Knockbauer again with the State Water Board. As Eric mentioned earlier regarding trees and small areas and discretion, it may be practical to cap a few emitters or sprinklers. That may be one way to deal with sort of larger irrigation controllers that are covering multiple different areas or areas that serve multiple different functions. But I'll hand it over to my colleague David for the mechanism question.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I think two points are worth exploring here. The first one is about authority to enforce. I assume you're looking at subdivision D3 of the staff proposal, which says implement and enforce a rule or ordinance banning at a minimum those water uses prohibited by the board's last drought reg. And yes, if we're not calling out these violations as infractions, then you would not have new separate authority to enforce those yourself. But first of all, that provision, subdivision D3, only applies to those urban water suppliers that haven't adopted water shortage contingency plans under the staff proposal. So if you have adopted a water shortage contingency plan, you wouldn't be following this subdivision D. You'd be implementing level 2 of your water shortage contingency plan, and presumably you wouldn't need authority provided from the board to implement that. So this is really only for those suppliers who haven't adopted water shortage contingency plans yet. And as for how those who haven't adopted water shortage contingency plans yet would enforce or implement those actions, what the draft regulation calls for is for those suppliers to adopt an ordinance or a regulation or a rule so that you would have the authority to implement that. Now, the other consideration would be for the board to do what it did in the January emergency rulemaking and make some or any of these prohibitions infractions, which you could then enforce yourself. But it really is a small, narrow category of suppliers who are going to be asked to do that. And you can do it through your own regulation or ordinance or implement what you already have in place. I hope that answers your question.
It does, but I wasn't actually speaking about that. I was just saying, how as a municipality do we go out to a facility and tell them, look, you have to stop using water on your turf area. It's going to look ugly. It's going to die. And they're going to say, well, what are you going to do to are you going to give me a refund? Are you going to pay me to make this aesthetic? Because we have planning specs, we have planning standards. There are things that we have in place. And if we tell them they cannot use potable water, we're more or less telling them you have to replace that turf. And unless you've got a turf replacement and removal rebate type program in place, we are going to see a lot of pushback as to what are we going to do for them to make this happen, or what is the state going to do them for that matter?
Sorry if I was confused. I think maybe I was talking about something different. I was talking about the subdivision D, which would require that certain water suppliers to adopt by rule or ordinance the prohibitions that are already in place from the previous board reg.
Yeah,
but you're talking about the non-functional turf prohibition. Under the proposal that the staff has put out, that's not something that you have to enforce. We would certainly encourage all the suppliers to communicate that to their CII sector, but as currently crafted, that's a provision for the board to enforce, and that's a statewide entire CII sector for non-functional turf. So I'm not sure if that, it doesn't quite answer your question about how do you tell them that, but how we tell them that is something we'll have to work out.
Okay. And then I guess that lastly, my question would be that for those CII that implemented, who came into place after 2015 and the water efficient landscape ordinance was in place, that do have the minimal amount of turf, you know, if they are in it, if they've completed their water efficiency, their MAWA and their ETWU, and they are staying within their water budgets, are we still going to, or are you still going to be requiring them to not water that, you know, as a part of what they've already planned, as a, you know, I guess similar to some of the cities who are saying they don't, you know, that it's a part of their sustainable amount?
I can't speak for how the board will choose to ultimately treat this, but in the staff proposal, everybody is treated the same.
Yeah.
It's, you know, we started with what the executive order started with, which was banning this particular use under these circumstances. And so the staff proposal currently is statewide for those sectors. But, you know, your comment is definitely heard and will be considered by the board. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Stephanie and David. Again, since we have so many in the queue right now, please do keep your comments and questions as brief as possible, hopefully under 2 minutes, just so we can get through the queue. And again, there's the opportunity to send Paola and I comments, and then the official public comment period will be announced mid-May. So let's go with Brian D from the city of Colton, and then after that, Alice T.
Yeah, this is Brian Dickinson with the city of Colton. The previous speaker pretty much asked the same stuff I had regarding like development in CII, and if we're going to prohibit irrigating stuff on their landscaping and it starts dying out, they may be wanting recompensation for that. So that is going to be a challenge. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Your comment is noted. We will move on to Alice T. And then after that, whoever is on the phone with the number that ends in 099, I will request to unmute when it's your turn. So Alice T from Edmud.
Thank you. Alice Tui, I'm the manager of water conservation at East Bay Mud. Thanks for the chance to speak. I'm also commenting on the ban on irrigating non-functional turf in the CII sector. I just want to say I appreciate that you're keeping the definition of non-functional turf a little bit vague and not requiring agencies to enforce it. My concern and what I hope you will keep in mind as you refine the definition and think about enforcement is the potential environmental justice issues. You know, one person's street median is another person's park. We have communities where kind of a wide grassy median in the middle of the street might be, you know, the main green space that folks in that community have access to. And it would be unfortunate if folks in disadvantaged communities lose access to those green spaces. And then similarly, just in terms of, you know, how this actually rolls out, again, I have a concern about the sort of unintended consequences of implementation that, you know, this is going to lead to a scenario where wealthy communities, you know, the turf gets removed and replaced with, you know, beautiful, you know, drought tolerant native plants, which we all love. And in disadvantaged communities, the grass either just dies or is ripped out and replaced with bark. So just again, I hope you will consider those matters as you refine the definition and think about enforcement. And I hope that the state, you know, will move forward with some additional funding, particularly for turf replacement in disadvantaged communities. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I do want to point out that the staff proposal does attempt to address that situation in the definition of non-functional turf. And it's not just sports fields, but turf that's regularly used for human recreational purposes or civic or community events. So the intent is not to be addressing, you know, that communal turf that's used in disadvantaged communities or in you know, more compacted communities where it's less residential turf in front of the houses and more shared spaces. But if you have comments on how we can improve upon that, absolutely love to hear that. But we definitely tried to accomplish what you're suggesting right off the bat. And if we can do it better, please help us. Thank you.
Thanks, David, and thanks, Alice. Please do send us comments and suggestions. Next up is the person who is on the phone 099. I'll ask you to unmute. That's usually pressing *6. And after that will be Bonnie W. So please, person on the phone, please press *6 and state your name and affiliation.
Hi, yes, this is Chris Nelson with Carmichael Water District. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. So, yeah, I just honestly, Stephanie and previous callers kind of already hit on some of the concerns I had about the non-functional turf ban, but just kind of like to reiterate some of the challenges that we will be facing with that. You know, we already get a lot of calls because we're currently in stage 2 of our water storage plan. It doesn't call for a turf ban, or I'm sorry, irrigation of non-functional turf ban. But regardless, we get a lot of phone calls, a lot of staff response to water waste. This ban, although not enforceable by our district, you know, will potentially generate quite a few more calls. We're always the front line when these regulations come out. So, you know, our customers will be looking to us when they have a complaint about it. So it's going to definitely increase our traffic, staff time to respond to these. Guess my question is, what is the board's expectation beyond just communicating the ban, as far as, you know, how far do we go? Are we expected to send letters to these customers that they've violated a state board regulation? And also, does the State Water Board have any plans to develop any kind of you know, outreach and communication materials that water providers can use? Thank you.
Thank you. Possibly James and others.
Yeah, I would say in terms of implementation, we're still figuring out how best to be supportive as this rolls forward. But thank you for the comment, and I certainly understand how, you know, guidance or templates on communications could help. The state already does have a communications campaign related to the drought and saving water, and that certainly could be updated to reflect this if this emergency regulation is adopted.
And this is Eric. I'll just add that, you know, as you can see, we're early in the process here. And as we narrow in on an actual adopted and go through the process and land on an adopted regulation here, emergency regulation, I do think it's, you know, very likely that we will develop some sort of frequently asked questions that address some of these issues once we know exactly where this is moving to and how it lands. I've heard the recurring theme about the enforcement question, and that's something we need to think about internally some more. Although I've heard it raised as a concern, I'm not hearing a lot of requests per se that, you know, somehow that like a water district would be given the authority and put in the place where they're responsible for enforcing the non-functional turf ban, but more just questions on what does it mean for us. But I don't think I've heard a lot of like request for that authority. Like, I'm not hearing you want to get into the business of requiring people not to water their non-functional turf areas. Of course, in the case of municipalities, we would expect that for your own non-functional turf, you would, you know, be responsible for making sure that's not being watered.
Yeah, just for Carmichael Water District, as far as the enforcement piece and whether wanting to have that authority or not, you know, our current water storage contingency plan doesn't call for a ban on irrigation of non-functional turf until we get way down the line into much later stages. So that's not something I would be asking for in our current stage, especially.
Thanks for the clarification.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you for your comments and questions. We move on to Bonnie W. and then after that, Perry G. So Bonnie, I'll ask you to unmute.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me this moment to speak. My name is Bonnie Woodrum. I'm with the Elsinore Valley Municipal Water District, and we do echo many of the comments that were heard here today. And in the interest of time, I will follow up with your email here, Chris, and share some of those sentiments back, and hopefully you can share that with the Water Board. But my biggest question today, and forgive me if I missed it, it was already answered. Is there a baseline set for this 20%? Would it be specific to, say, the 2021 water year, or, off of which numbers that would come from? And then also, do we have a deadline that we're looking at that 20%?
All right, possibly James or Eric, if you want to respond.
Sure. So there's actually not a 20% sort of requirement or target that this emergency regulation tries to achieve. We're going to be continuing to report the same way we have been reporting, looking at comparing like current month to the same month in 2020. And, our requirements were more focused, they're action-based. They're focused on the actions, you undertaking the actions that are required at level 2 of your shortage plan, keeping in mind that those actions at level 2 are designed to achieve a 20% reduction in use. But we're going to continue just to report the same way we've been reporting for the last several months. And the hope is that we at least achieve the 15% reduction goal that the governor had set several months back. If we hit 20, great. But it's not like in the previous drought where we actually had a percent reduction requirement. Again, it's really just action based. We're looking to you to implement the actions in your plan.
All right, thank you. Next will be Perry G and then M Fritchie. So Perry G, I'll ask you to unmute.
Okay, my question is, here at the City of Banning, we've done similar to everything else everyone's mentioned, and we've actually stored water in our aquifer to be able to take and have it for during drought situations. The question I have is, when we built our WSCP, we looked at it and as if it's a true drought situation. So the problem we have is if we are requested to implement stage 2, that becomes where we actually have no more new water meters within the City of Banning, no more construction meters out there. And that stops the growth within the City of Banning. We went 10 years with only 10 houses built in a matter of 10 years. Now we are considered one of the fastest growing communities here in Southern California. And now all of a sudden we're going to be restricted just because of overall state requirement. With that, can we change our WSCP if we've already submitted it and it's already been approved?
I think we would need to confer with the Department of Water Resources on that question about can you change it, because that's really within their purview. I don't know the answer. I don't know anyone else on our staff does. But I do think it would be, I would like to follow up with you directly on this issue. Sure. Because it's somewhat unusual at least from my review of water shortage contingency plans throughout the state, which certainly is not comprehensive. I missed yours, for example. It's pretty unusual to have at level 2 a ban on new connections, and it sounds like you do. And so this is it seems like a fairly unusual situation. So I do think it would be good if you reached out to the team and we could set up a follow-up with you directly on this. And maybe in that meeting, we could also involve the Department of Water Resources to get at your question of, could we modify our shortage plan?
Okay. Yeah, the big issue that we had, we actually looked at it as if we were in a true drought situation. And then that's where we started going that direction with it. And I believe there was a couple other agencies that have done the same thing, working with the consultants that we worked with. Thank you.
Thank you. And
Thank
we'll-
you.
Thanks, Eric and Perry. We'll go on to M. Fritchie, and then after that, Kelly Fortner. So I will ask to unmute. Please share your name and your affiliation.
Yeah, this is Michael Fritchie, and I'm with the Rancho Marietta CSD. And I just had a brief question. I did miss the very beginning of the presentation, unfortunately, but my question was, are there any plans for these restrictions to go for non-urban water suppliers?
No, these apply as specified in the executive order just to urban water suppliers.
So there's no,
except for the
no thoughts that
non-functional
may go
turf.
non-urban.
Sorry,
Sorry.
David added an important clarification.
Yeah, sorry if I talked over you. I was just going to say that the non-functional turf component of the emergency regulation is statewide for everybody as written, so CII sector. But the urban water supplier components or sections of the draft regulation are for urban water suppliers.
Okay, so just the non-functional turf component for the non. Great, thank you.
Thank you. And again, just a reminder to keep your comments and questions as brief as possible so that we can get through the queue. So we'll go to Kelly F, and then after that, Brian I.
Hi, my name is Kelly Fortner with the City of San Luis Obispo. My question is the proposed regulation intending the supplier to formally declare a stage 2 water shortage in order to implement these demand measures, or just begin implementing the actions outlined in our plan? Thanks.
Possibly council or James
And I
to
think,
clarify.
These are about actions to take, and so the mechanisms that you may need to get there, I think, are going to be locally determined. Yeah, the goal of the administration here is the water savings more than the mechanism.
The staff proposal that's out on the street says that the supplier has to implement the demand reduction actions in your water shortage contingency plan level 2 and gives a deadline for that. But again, the board hasn't adopted this regulation yet. And any of these components could be certainly subject to your comment and consideration by the board of any possible changes to this staff proposal. But yes, the intent at this point from the staff proposal would be that you implement them. And like James said, we don't have a particular level of expertise as to how you implement them. That would be for each agency on its own to decide whether that's done through a meeting or adoption of the entire plan or level 2. But in the staff draft proposal, it doesn't call on you to implement every component of your water shortage contingency plan level 2, just the demand reduction actions. And I did say that at the beginning. I'm not sure if you'd caught that, but we're not asking under this proposal that you start implementing, for example, supply augmentation actions if you don't feel that those are necessary under your current local circumstances. So I'm not sure how you exactly implement that in each of the 410-ish circumstances.
All right, thank you, Kelly. We'll go on to Brian I and then Amy T. So Brian, I'll ask you to unmute.
Hi, Brian Issa, City of Eureka. We're a direct customer of Humboldt Bay, so we are in that unique situation. So I'll ditto everything that Fiona said earlier. I'd also like to point out for the board that the flip side of that is that we have a significantly different demand regime than most other places in California. Not only is the supply a little different, but the demand is different. Our outdoor irrigation use at the city of Eureka is about 6%. So when you start talking about quantitative reductions of 10 to 20%, you're talking about reducing indoor demand by 14+%. So I know that the question has been asked and answered of whether or not there's a specific quantitative reduction target within this legislation, and in the current legislation there's not, but I'd like to ask the board, if you had to look into the future and see where this is going, knowing that this is an emergency regulation, do you see this becoming codified in a way that there are specific quantitative demand reduction targets as there have been in the past? And what allowance can be made for the differences in indoor versus irrigation outdoor demand across different jurisdictions?
So I'll just say at this point, there's no requirement for like 8% reduction. That wasn't in any of the active executive orders or drought proclamations. I don't, I can't speak to what the future holds. My understanding is, the administration leaving all available tools on the table, but as of right now, what we're talking about now and focusing on the non-functional turf and implementation of the level 2 actions represents the current direction from the governor.
Thank you, Brian and Eric. We'll move on to Amy T and then Brian S.
Hi everyone, this is Amy Talbot from Regional Water Authority. Just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to provide comments today. I think the draft regulation is in line with the executive order and is relatively simple and straightforward, which I think is appropriate for a temporary regulation. Also wanted to thank you for aligning the draft regulation with local water shortage contingency plans and taking advantage of the new uniform contingency plan structure outlined in the water code. Local water suppliers are best equipped to implement demand reduction actions that are appropriate and most effective for their service areas that take into account local water use patterns and community characteristics. I also just wanted to acknowledge that DWR is in between a rock and a hard place a little bit with the dual submissions of the annual water supply and demand assessment reports. The executive order says June 1st, preliminary report, and statute says July 1st, both of which are requirements. It's likely that most suppliers will have little to no change in supply and demand conditions between the June preliminary report and July final report. Just wanted to put that thought out there, that maybe set some expectations. There might not be changes between the two. They might be exactly the same. And then for the CII non-functional turf component requirement, just wanted to thank you for including exceptions for the health of trees and other perennial non-turf plantings. I think it's important to maintain the health of our trees. And while we know that turf grass can grow back, there's also a lot of uncertainty in identifying applicable sites for the CII component and then communicating to customers about this part of the regulation, as it would be a new endeavor for most suppliers. This is especially important because it's part of a temporary emergency drought regulation in which the time frame for prohibiting watering of these sites is really uncertain. So it's really hard to communicate, you need to stop, but we don't know for how long. So I just wanted to identify that as a concern. The language does leave some flexibility in there for local water suppliers to tailor this requirement to be more locally appropriate. So that's a good thing. The gray area I see in the CII component is including HOAs, as they can be both residential and commercial customers. I think it's cleaner to remove HOAs altogether and keep it really more straightforward CII focused. I like the State Water Board kind of regulation tracking approach to keep reporting out at the State Water Board meetings, as y'all have been doing in the past, and then focusing on number of suppliers that are in stage 2 and the types of actions that are being implemented as the additional kind of reporting out for the emergency regulation. And just my own personal thought is I always thought water shortage contingency plans were kind of a living document that could be updated as appropriate or needed. I know some suppliers updated their plans during the 2015-2016 drought to respond to local needs. So I was kind of assuming that would be the deal going forward, but I'm not sure if there's an official position on this, but just something that I always thought was kind of the approach. And that's it. Thanks for hosting this meeting and for opening up a different link so more of us could get on, and for listening to our comments. And we will continue to work with the state to promote and implement conservation as part of our drought response. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy, for your helpful comments and suggestions. We'll move on to Brian S. and then Fiona S. There are still several folks in the queue and we're getting close to the top of the hour. So please do keep your comments and questions as brief as possible. Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, thank you. This is Brian Soderman from Olevenheim Municipal Water District located in San Diego County. Thank you for the opportunity to provide feedback. I had two requests, but I'll be brief. I understand that the executive order calls for the board to consider a requirement for suppliers to move to level 2 of the water shortage plan. But I'd like to comment that Water Code section 10632 establishes that shortage levels are based on a supplier's water supply conditions. And as we've learned from the previous drought, a one-size-fits-all approach just doesn't work well. I'd like to ask staff to offer an alternative to the one-size-fits-all approach for the board to consider. As before, a stress test by way of supply demand assessment should be performed, and suppliers should move to the appropriate level of their water shortage plan that corresponds to the results of that demand assessment. We're already doing the demand assessment, and we could use those results to determine which level we move to. The second request I have is for the functional turf. I'd like to request that the definition be expanded to include other functionalities of the turf. Turf's used for pastures, for pet yards, erosion control, reduction runoff, dust control, fire breaks. There's a lot of other functions out there that I would like to see included if possible. Thank you.
Thank you for your brevity and your clear suggestions, Brian. And now we'll go on to Fiona S. And then after that, Joe S. Asking you to unmute, Fiona.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, thank you. It's Fiona Sanchez with Irvine Ranch Water District. My comment actually is, and first of all, just thank you for the opportunity to comment and for, I think, the flexibility that the staff proposal has provided. My comment relates to in the definition of turf. So it's in section 996, I think it's A7. And that references section 491. And in that section, it really just describes types of turf and says that they must be mowed. What I was wondering is whether there would be any consideration to exclude types of turf that have been specifically cultivated to be low water use. So for example, the University of California developed a buffalo grass that uses only 1/4 of the amount of water as other turf grasses. And so that is something that they have been promoting, and it's something that I know we potentially have in our service area. And so it seems if the intent is to avoid, excessive water use, excessive water waste, if CII customers have installed a turf grass that is actually only using 1/4 of the amount of water as regular turf, I'm wondering whether those types of turf could potentially be excluded from having to have irrigation prohibited, since the amount of irrigation to require is already so low. So that's my comment. And so we just appreciate that consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona, for your comment. We'll go on to Joe S. and then Ashley P. Joe S.
Hi, Joe Suska from the city of Culver City. I work in the Public Works Department, and I wonder that after the decision is made, will the Water Board be distributing sample press releases that we can share with our constituents with links to websites to get more information and or prepare answers to frequently asked questions that we can distribute?
James or others?
Yeah, great question. As we move through this process, we will be developing frequently asked questions, documents, and potentially other materials that may be helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Those will all be posted on the program website. Thank you. And Ashley P. and then Janet R.
Hi, thank you. My name's Ashley Parks and I'm from Exponent. I just had two quick questions. The first being, how would apartment communities be defined? Would they be considered commercial properties? And if so, what would their turf be considered? For example, would it be considered functional if it's used for activities such as dog walking or sort of open areas for residents to play or lounge?
Possibly Council, David.
Sure. In the staff proposal, I'm not sure I can get into every nuance because I don't know what type of apartment situation exactly you're talking about, but we did try to address this, and generally apartments are residential. And even if all of their turf wouldn't necessarily be considered residential turf, although I think that much of it would be, there is a specific carve out in the regulation for, in essence, well, functional turf, which is turf used for gathering and recreation, things like that. So we tried to make sure in the draft staff proposal or the staff draft proposal that this would be, that wouldn't be impacted. But there may be situations where a apartment complex or building has a business center or something else that is technically a CII in the CII sector. So that would, the intent currently is that that would be treated like a CII sector, and the rest of it that's for residential use would be treated like the residential sector. That's the intent, and hopefully the text reflects that, but we're definitely open to any suggestions that you may have to improve upon it.
Thank you. I kind of lost the thread here. So Janet, did you go already? I believe Janet R is next, and then Diana W. So Janet.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you, Chris. I just want to thank you all for this opportunity to be able to provide some comment. I just wanted to go back to Perry's comment from Danny and then just get some clarification. So my understanding is that we are to implement restrictions from our water shortage contingency plan level 2 or stage 2. So I just want to confirm, and that's what it's drafted, we have to implement but not adopt. And the reason why I ask is because, just like Perry, we're currently in the process, and I'm sure many others are probably doing the same, are in the process of enhancing our water shortage contingency plan. We currently only have 3 stages, and our stage 2 would actually implement larger than 20% savings. So that's why we're actually adding additional stages. So I just want to make sure or get some clarification that we are just to implement water restrictions and not necessarily adopt our stage 2. So if I could just get some feedback on that, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Either Dave, James, or Eric.
The current staff proposal of the reg text says implement. And like I noted before, we don't intend to get involved in exactly how you do that. But there is a deadline in the proposal, and hopefully for your situation, implement doesn't necessarily mean adopt, but we're not trying to tell you exactly how to do that. But like I think James and Eric said before, in other situations, if you have unique circumstances that you want to discuss, like banning, I believe did, then please do contact us. It sounds like you have a unique situation in that you have 3 water shortage contingency plan levels as opposed to 6. So that's certainly relevant. But again, we were taking our cue from the executive order, and level 2 generally does refer to a 10 to 20% reduction or a shortage condition. So that's where our starting point is. Hope that helps.
I'll just say it seems a little unusual that would have a water shortage plan with 3 stages, because I thought by law everybody now is aligned with I think it's 5 or 6 stages, each stage tied to the same level of saving. So I'm wondering, are you a supplier maybe that does not have a current water shortage contingency plan and would be subject to the sort of model requirements?
Janet, I don't know if you wanted to answer that, but that is another point worth addressing.
I was just waiting to be unmuted. But yes, so actually our stage 2 is a combination of stage 2 and 3. So our stage 2 actually goes up to 30%.
It is possible if you think that your water shortage contingency plan isn't exactly what Water Code section 10632.1 or 10632 call for, that you could, I think, potentially opt into the regulation provisions for a supplier who hasn't adopted a water shortage contingency plan and implement those provisions of the reg. I'm not sure if you'd find that more palatable or not, and whether you think that that's reasonable. But you know, if your unique circumstances are something that you think the board needs to definitely call out, then please do reach out to us separately.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are at the top of the hour, but those staff that can stay to answer any questions will stay, and we'll try to get through all of the queue. So next is Linda G, and then after that, Phil D. Linda?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
This is Linda Grand with the City of Milpitas. We had a question regarding the annual supply and demand assessment and the changing it to June 1st. So as an urban water retailer, we buy our water from 2 wholesalers. So to get those supply numbers, we really need the information from them. It would be helpful if the state had a requirement for wholesalers to provide retailers this information before this deadline. So if there was a date for wholesalers that they had to give us this data, that would really help us meet these June 1st early deadline to give you that preliminary information. We've been having a lot of back and forth of when can they actually give us this information. And since that is vital information for our assessment, guidance from the state to wholesalers would help clarify this.
Thanks. I think one thing I want to note is that the June submittal is a preliminary assessment. Obviously, you and we would all like that to be the best one that it could be, and we'll see what we can do. But yeah, the expectation is not to change the deadline for the July submittal, the final assessment, but to get a preliminary assessment a month early. And if there's changes, you know, that's the difference between preliminary and final. So we're definitely open to potential changes to the reg text before it's adopted, but you know, it's not expected that you would be relying on information you don't have for June, just for July.
All right, thank you. So next would be Phil D and then Greg B. So Phil, if you can share your name and affiliation.
Hello, yes, thank you. So Phil Dolan with the Santa Clara Valley Water District. Just passing along a few comments about the other water use restrictions, I believe from the January regulations. In regards to decorative fountains, just to add a language about to specify only without water recirculation. For cleaning hard surfaces, to include language to except for low volume, high efficiency device, such as a water broom or pressure washer, and when addressing health and safety needs. And for when addressing trees, to avoid overwatering, use high efficiency irrigation, and to consider the use of gray water to support tree health. And also to add a provision to only irrigate at night or in the early morning. And that's it.
Thanks, Phil. I want to note that the board is not considering amendments to the January regulation at this time, but if they do consider it, either as it's scheduled to expire 1 year from adoption or based on a need in advance of that, definitely keep those comments in mind. And also there will be solicitation for further comments if we're doing that. Just to be clear, that's not part of this.
Gotcha, thanks.
Thank you. Actually, up next now is Justin F, and after that is Spencer W. Justin?
Hi, thank you so much. I just wanted to get a quick clarification on sections B, C, and D. There's directives to urban water suppliers, and just wanted to make sure we get some clarification that that is referring to either retail or wholesale urban water suppliers or both.
Is someone able to clarify that?
Yeah, this applies to both.
Thank you.
Great. And then next is Spencer W, and then Stephanie. And then I believe that will be the last question. So I'll unmute Spencer, then last question will be Stephanie.
Hi there. My name is Spencer Waterman. I'm from Water Systems Consulting, and we work with agencies across the state in order to comply with this executive order. So thanks for the information provided so far in this opportunity. One thing I wanted to mention about a previous comment is that agencies are allowed to not have the 6 standard stages so long as they provide a crosswalk that shows how they meet those 6 standard stages. So that should be laid out in those agencies' WSCP. Beyond that, based on what I'm hearing today, there isn't a requirement to reduce consumption by a given percentage or date. Rather, the requirement is just to implement stage 2 by June 10th. So when some agencies consider implementing a stage 2, it doesn't mean that they'll implement all of their potential demand reductions, the actions that they may take from a menu of options. Rather, they may just choose some, which they will select to reduce enough to meet an actual shortage. So based on my understanding, it could happen that an agency would elect to declare a stage 2, but then they wouldn't actually implement certain reduction actions to reach a given percentage reduction target. So therefore, they could potentially declare a stage 2 as sort of a symbolic action without an actual demand reduction of 20%. So I'm just curious if that would meet the requirements of the executive order under that scenario.
I'll take first crack at an answer. The current proposed language of the regulation, the staff proposal, does say implement the demand reduction actions. Again, the board hasn't adopted this or considered this language yet, and so I'd very much appreciate any comments that you could submit that might clarify the need for this flexibility, and whether the suppliers who do have in their level 2 actions, for example, a suite of actions that they choose some from, whether that's called out, because potentially if the water shortage contingency plan says some of these apply in this stage, that might be sufficient as a trigger because it's already built into the plan. But that's not currently in the draft language that staff have proposed. It would be that the supplier implement the demand reduction actions taken or called out in that stage, in that level.
Okay, great. Just a follow-up question to that is, so when agencies are considering what stage they're going to go to, a lot of them have to go to a governing body. And so if we won't know what the recommended adopted language from the board is going to be until mid-May or late May, some agencies may not have a governing board meeting between then and June 10th. And so I'm just curious how you would anticipate responding to agencies who can't get a resolution or an ordinance passed within that time frame between mid-May and June 10th.
So the staff proposal is hewing pretty closely to the executive order language. And I think that even if there are changes, you know better than we do whether your supplier or your governing body needs to have a meeting and not just call a special meeting if needed in order to adopt or implement the demand reduction actions in the level 2 of your water shortage contingency plan. But if you think that that might be an issue, certainly that's something you could start now, I would think, because the current staff proposal is going to form a basis for what the board considers, because like I said, it hews pretty closely to what the executive order does specify. And so I don't think that there's a problem, but I'll defer to you if you think there's a problem for starting the process, if you think that that's necessary to implement level 2. Hope that helps. There may be changes. Of course, the board will consider those. But if a meeting is needed, I don't think there's anything wrong with starting the process for that.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right. Next is Stephanie N. I'll ask you to unmute and share your affiliation.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Nevins, and I'm the Water Use Efficiency Program Supervisor for Alameda County Water District. We're in the Southeast Bay Area. And I'll make this quick. I just want to thank you for the opportunity to comment on the draft emergency regulation. We appreciate that it is not too prescriptive and flexible. My comment is mostly related to the definition of non-functional turf, or rather the interpretation of the definition, as it can be tricky. So I know that the state intends to keep this flexible, but it would be good to have guidance or criteria that helps our customers understand what is and what is not considered functional turf. And then I just wanted to also echo some concerns raised earlier about equity, areas where the turf may die off because they don't have the funds to put something else in there. That could create blight. And I just had a quick question. I know that this is written to address the executive order, but I just wonder if the board has considered limiting irrigation of non-functional turf versus banning it altogether, and then possibly looking at the future and maybe a statewide ban on new non-functional turf. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. Possibly James or Dave. Thank you. Dave, did you want to, your video came on, did you want to respond to that?
Oh, sorry about that. I didn't have a particular response other than this is a starting point, starting from the executive order, and everybody who has comments should definitely, please, if possible, submit them in writing so we can consider everything you've said here today, but also text changes and everything else that's best done in writing. So very much appreciate it.
All right, thank you. And last for today will be Michael L. If you can state your name and your affiliation. And then we will end today's webinar after this. Michael, it looked like Michael had disappeared, or?
Hi,
yes.
my name is Michael Lay with Foothill Municipal Water District. I just have one quick question. And I guess just a little bit of background. So Metropolitan Water District, they have a proposed measures for their service area that they're going to take to their board at the end of this month. And that one of the rules that they're proposing is a once a day or once a week watering for the state water project area. Let's say if that passed, and for your regulation, for your emergency regulation for section D number 2, it says implement and enforce rule for no more than 2 days per week. So if both pass, does your regulation supersede Metropolitan's, or how does that work?
No, our regulation wouldn't supersede any local obligations. That also D2 of the staff proposal only applies to suppliers who haven't adopted a water shortage contingency plan. So the expectation for everybody who has adopted, all urban water suppliers who have adopted a water shortage contingency plan, they're not under subdivision D. They'd be looking at implementing their own level 2 restrictions, demand restrictions. But no, if there are more strict obligations imposed by the supplier or anywhere else. We're not relieving anybody of those. These are setting, certain obligations for the duration of this emergency regulation. Hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
All right, and that will end the live Q&A of the webinar, and this will also end the webinar. So again, for more information, as you see on your screen, please go to bit.ly/conservationreg, and that's where we'll be updating the documents. And you can also subscribe under stay informed for the email list for announcements on the rulemaking and the public comment. Please look out for that in mid-May. And again, I and Paula will be your staff contacts from the State Water Board. So again, this is the end of the webinar, and thank you all for participating, and have a good rest of your day.